And so we'll move on to our next session on how to build a prosperous India. So let me just start off in the interest of time and introduce our moderator for this session. So who better to have a conversation around a book on steering India to wealth than someone who spent over 3 decades in the industry, in equity research, investment management, running an institutional broking business, and more. So please welcome a veteran of the finance world, Rajashekar Iyer. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Yeah,
A chartered accountant by qualification, he started his career in leading audit firms and has worn multiple hats. He's edited a leading stock market magazine, run a popular value investing newsletter for many years, set up the research desk, and then headed the institutional broking business at Kotak Securities. In 2008, Mr. Rajshekar promoted Securities Investment Management Private Limited, a SEBI registered portfolio management company. He straddled various investment strategies and he likes to buy companies where profit growth can be very high, but the current valuation is low. And I think that's something where you must let us in on some of those secrets. Because today, the valuation numbers we hear, we can't even count the zeros, or we don't even know how many they hold, right? So he, he uses technicals to optimize the entry point and capture the excess on the upside of the market. So I'll hand over to you, Mr. Rajshekar, for a conversation today with our esteemed author, Mr. Bhaskar. Over to you.
yeah. Thank you, Shubha. Hi, Bhaskar. How are you?
Hi, Raj. It's good to see you on the screen.
Yes, it's been quite some time since we could meet. Um, just to introduce Bhaskar for the benefit of the audience, I've known Bhaskar for, I don't know, now, close to 35 years now. I remember as a friend, as a journalist, as an editor, as a researcher, mm, as an entrepreneur, and now as a writer of very interesting books. So I remember in the late 80s and 90s, we used to meet weekly at his office in Express Towers to discuss the next month's stories. And Bhaskar used to be bouncing around talking about various industries and ideas. Um, so Bhaskar has always been very passionate on India and very passionate on, very optimistic about India's growth opportunities, even when it was not very fashionable for journalists to be optimistic about India, you know. So his last book about growth, Game India, on the various opportunities that India has to succeed
Game
in the
India.
world, Game India, came out about 3.5 years back now, and maybe it's time to sort of review some of those
Yes.
ideas in the book. Bhaskar has written one more book recently. It's still not with us. It should be available to us very soon, I think, Bhaskar.
End October.
End October. So this is a book on one of India's
Yes.
most successful industrialists and entrepreneurs, the remarkable Mr. Gautam Adani. We don't have the book with us, but we'll discuss some of the ideas which form part of the book. But to start off with, Bhaskar, one of the subjects that you've always been very passionate about and written in your earlier book is the dairy industry in India. You know, and you
Yes.
had mentioned that India has huge advantages in the dairy industry and can be probably the leading player in the world. And I think it is already the leading player in the world, is
It
it?
is the leading player.
It is the leading player in the world. And by coincidence, I think day before yesterday, India hosted the International Dairy Conference.
I'm
Where,
there right now. I'm
oh,
there right now.
okay. I believe Prime Minister Modi inaugurated the event, and
Yes.
there was a lot of optimism about the growth going forward of the industry also. So, what do you think has been done well, and compared to what you thought 3 years back? Has there been progress, and you're happy with how things have shaped up? Are you optimistic about how things will happen in the future in the industry?
Well, let me clarify one thing. That while I'm optimistic about India, mine is a lover's quarrel with his world. I am pretty annoyed at the way governments work, and governments distort India's potential to grow. If the dairy industry is done very well, it is in spite of the government. It was because of a visionary called Varghese Kurian, who actually made India the #1 producer of milk, the lowest cost producer, the most interesting producer. And as Kurian said, I do not believe in mass production, but I believe in production by the masses. And almost 80% of the cattle owners are small time players with just 1 or 2 cattle heads, often tied in the backyard. So it's an amazing thing to harness the strength of small people and still become one of the largest players in the world. There's a second interesting thing that you must that I picked up this just today at the conference, at the dairy conference, and that is, in India you have a situation where the world is talking about the methane footprint that cattle cause.
Yes.
And today's discussions are very interesting because they find that India has the lowest cattle footprint, the methane footprint, that any other country in the world, because India does not grow food specially for cattle. Because a byproduct of rice and wheat, the stalks, are used by the cattle, and every excretion of the cattle, whether it's gobar or whether it's gas or it is urine, is harnessed into the ecosystem once again. And right now, the dairy industry is very bullish on CNG as well as biogas for cooking.
Okay. Now, I remember you mentioning that because Indians eat a lot of rice and wheat, and the byproduct becomes a cattle feed, India has a huge advantage in
Yes.
that.
And I remember asking Kurian, what about China? China eats rice. And Kurian laughed and he said, that is where God has been kind to us. The Chinese don't digest milk, and so they will not produce so much of milk.
Right.
While India, it's a staple diet right from the time a child is born till that time a person dies. You have either ghee, or you have butter, or you have one of the dairy products being used in the ceremonies relating to birth and death, besides consuming milk and yogurt and everything else besides.
It's increasing. But on one of the topics you touched upon in answer to the first question, you talked about government's contribution to growth. And I think even in the introduction to your book last time, you had mentioned that very often India grows despite governance rather than
Yes.
because of government. But in the last few years, ease of doing business has become one of the big mantras for all economic advisors and for governments. Do you see
Yes.
significant changes taking place since 1931 in 1991? I'm sorry, in India, and more so in the last few years.
Yes, there have been changes. There have been changes in the sense that you can see the types of cars that are coming, the mobile phones. You don't have queues for phones. I remember when my father was alive, we had a waiting list of 15 to 20 years. And my father worked in the telephone, so we had a free telephone at home. And there'd always be a queue of neighbors outside the house saying, can we use your phone? Or we'd get a phone call, aap padosi ko bula lenge. Now, that was the kind of India that we grew up in. And today, nobody waits for a phone.
Right.
And so there has been some changes. But at the same time, there have been some regressions also. The purchasing power of the farmer has gone down. The GDP growth rate, which was very remarkable in the 1990s and in the early 2000s, has started slowing down. And there could be various factors, but that is unfortunate. The quality of education at school levels is declining. And for me, that's worrisome because the future generation will need workers who are educated. So there have been good things, there have been not so good things, but I'm still hopeful because people like Azim Premji have come into education, are looking after schools. A person like Adani, through his foundation, has started picking up government schools and has started transforming government schools.
Right. So you think more can be done, but things are improving.
Things are improving, and I think that things will improve in spite of the government. Industry has found a way not to depend too much on the government. And what is again worrisome is that if you look at the last 2-3 years, the government's ability to garner taxes has been increasing by 15%, 20%, 30%, while your GDP has been growing at 5%, 6%. So obviously, the country has not been earning as much as the government has been.
So, on the question of India growing despite government, there are certain areas where growth is not possible or direction of growth is not possible without the right government policies in place. And one of the
Very true.
areas where you talked about at length in your book is the solar power and what Germany
Yes.
has done in terms of adoption of solar power.
Oh, brilliant. Yes.
So, have there been any changes in the last 3 or 4 years which make you optimistic about this?
Yes. I must tell you a small story that happened. About 4 years ago, I'd gone to Tripura. And when I'd gone to Tripura, I met the Chief Minister, Biplab Kumar Deb, who's not the Chief Minister now. And he was telling me how just before the 2018 elections, he was told by Modi that, every house must be connected to electricity, must be given electricity. And Biplab Kumar Deb got a survey done to find out whether he could connect all the houses. And then he found that 50,000 houses could not be connected for at least 3 more years. So he asked the engineers why. He said, because in the hills, to take the wires up to the hills will take some time. And he said, but I need to get them electrified before elections. And he said, no, sir, we can't do it. There's only one solution, that is solar. And when he looked at the government papers, he found that there was no budget for solar. So he went to Delhi, met the Union Power Minister, R.K. Singh, and said, I need solar for 50,000 houses. And R.K. Singh said, sorry, there's budget only for grid power, not for solar power. And so Biplab got upset. He said, listen, you don't have to fight elections, I have to fight elections. I need solar power. He said, sorry, there's no budget.
For politicians.
What's that?
The best motivator for politicians.
Yes, absolutely. So what happened is, he said, okay, what if the state pays for it? So R.K. Singh, if the state is paying for it, I have no objections. And he said, but give me an affidavit that the state will pay. So he asked his chief secretary, while he was sitting there, to send an affidavit immediately. And an undertaking was given to the central government that the state would pay. And he went back and ordered solar power to be given, rooftop solar, for all the 50,000 houses. Okay. Wonder of wonders, instead of waiting for 5 years, solar power was available to the villagers, the hilly tribes, in just about 6 months' time. Second wonder, while a grid power would have cost each household 5 lakhs of rupees, solar power cost him just 50,000 rupees.
Okay.
And the biggest surprise was that the villagers were thrilled with solar because it was more reliable than the linesmen who would bring the electricity to the house. It would get snapped, there'd be shutdowns, there'd be interruptions in power supply. Solar was reliable and a bakelite battery so that the power could be stored and used at night. It did wonderful. As a result, the whole of the Northeast started clamoring for solar, and now the government has no choice but to allow every state in the Northeast to have solar. So again, in spite of the government, solar has succeeded.
So that's very interesting, because this is what you call as rooftop solar, and you have recommended that as the best way for India to go, given the number of households India has, the number of houses India has. So is that something which other states have adopted?
Well, not so much. It's been adopted in small places here and there. Punjab has been very good, but Northeast is doing so well that now almost every private sector player, including the Adanis, are setting up a distribution network for solar in Northeast India.
Okay.
And Northeast India will change the dynamics of the whole of India, because once solar comes, the beauty is that you don't have any monthly bills, any 6 monthly bills. And because there are no bills, there are no monthly subsidies, and the politicians' power to play the subsidy game gets diminished automatically.
Okay.
It'll happen.
A target of 100 GB of solar power. So how much have we progressed towards that target?
Most of the solar power units that are put up in India are really solar farms, which I'm not happy about because that is a kind of a land grab that takes place.
Okay.
In rooftop solar, you don't need land. Every household can just put up a pole, even if the house is a thatched roof. You put up a pole and put up a solar panel right at the top, and there is power.
Lovely.
That is why, you see, Germany discovered, and this is something very interesting. At that time, the German minister was a person, Hermann Scheer,
Sure.
was an electrical engineer, and he discovered that in just by 2008, he started in 2000, by 2008, he discovered that Germany had more people employed in the solar sector than in the automobile sector. And my contention in 2010 was that India has more sunlight than Germany. India has more people, hence more houses. Rooftop solar is a given for India. It can create about 80 million jobs within 2 years' time. So while we have unemployment, we could solve the unemployment problem by just going for rooftop solar. And the government has not done that yet, except under pressure.
Yes, that was one of the very interesting chapters in your book, the one on solar. But the other thing you had written about was India's water capabilities.
Yes.
And I think you were one of the early admirers of Adani for setting up the ports all across the country. And in retrospect, he seems to have hit the jackpot with the ports. I mean, that seems to be one of the big drivers for the Adani business machine.
His mainstay is a port. It's a port that got him into coal trading.
Yeah. So, do you see that that is going to be something which is going to be increasingly, promoted by other states, the southern states, particularly the southern and eastern states?
Look, when you talk of water, there are two parts. One is water by the seashore, which is where ports and coastal shipping comes in.
Right.
And there's no one to beat Adani. Adani already owns more than 12 ports, and the number's increasing. He has bid for at least 4 more ports in India. He also has a port in Australia. He has a port in Colombo and a port in Israel in Haifa.
Right.
And he's growing both globally as well as in India. So as far as ports are concerned, coastal shipping is concerned, Adani will remain the uncrowned king. So while there's competition, he is the king.
And all this started with Mundra.
All started with Mundra, and today Mundra is perhaps the largest port in India.
Okay.
And he had the vision to buy lots of land around Mundra. So today he's locating companies. He's got Adani Wilmar there. He's got a UMPP power plant there. He's getting steel there, aluminium there, and a lot of other kinds of plants coming up at Mundra, including Maruti, its export hub. Mundra is amazing. What it's doing for India is just incredible.
So your book,
other part of water. Sorry, I must mention the other part of water. India is blessed because in terms of water, as a percentage of land mass, India has more water than Bangladesh, than Pakistan, and definitely more than China. India has water, but India abuses water. It destroys water. That's another story.
So you already touched upon the subject of education and the quality of the manpower, because one of the hot subjects whenever we talk about India and what seems to get a lot of traction with global investors and investors is demographics.
Yes.
So the next 20 years, India will have the largest young workforce in the world. But that's not of much use unless the workforce is well trained and educated and also motivated. So
yes.
In recent times, we have seen a lot of discussions about unemployment and also unemployability of the labor force. So do you think enough is being done in that area for the next 20 years? In terms of improving quality?
If you look at the Lok Sabha replies by the government, so this is not my statistics, it is what was stated by the government before the Lok Sabha. Unemployment for people who are not educated beyond the 6th standard is just about 2 to 3%. Unemployment for students who pass the 10th standard is almost over 50%. Unemployment for the graduates is almost as high as 80%. Now, what does that tell you? It just tells you that the man who's done his graduation is unemployable. You want a secretary, you advertise for a secretary, you get 100 applications, you'll be lucky if you get one. If you ask lawyers, they'll tell you that only 1% of the applications they get is employable. If you ask TCS and McKinsey, they'll say 20% is employable. Now, obviously, that is dangerous because that boy or girl has sat through 12 years of schooling, 5 years of college, and then becomes unemployable. The child has lost its 17 years of productivity and has become unproductive. That needs to change.
I remember one of the things you had mentioned in the book was the quality of high school education and school education, which makes the people who are inter college better qualified to learn from the colleges.
Yeah.
And you said one of the hurdles was that education was for some reason treated as a state subject, and because of which the government could not enact laws promoting education, particularly fiscal incentives or tax incentives, those kind of things.
Yes.
So the solution obviously lies in more private sector involvement in primary education and secondary education. Is that happening in any serious scale at all?
Yes, it is. Firstly, let me clarify. If the center wants, it can influence education dramatically, even though it's a state subject. Because one, it's on the concurrent list. Two, all grants and income tax benefits are given by the center. So it could bring in a system of evaluating schools and teachers and students. And wherever output is measured, the output measured is not satisfactory, the school could be denied the schools or the individuals could be denied those tax benefits. And if this poor output continues for 3 years, or the school management should be taken away and given to a management that has handled output much better, outcomes much better. Now that's one part. The second part is, yes, it's changing. Almost every big industrialist has set up his own educational campuses. Second, industrial players like Azim Premji have started working with the governments, state governments across, to tell them how to improve education at the school level without changing the teachers. This is what Adani is also doing now. In almost every state, including the backward states, he tells the government which are the schools that you want us to take over. They don't just change the teacher, they just start measuring outcomes and give a report to the government, and the government machinery automatically is compelled to bring in a financial discipline with the teachers and even with the management. That management control, without any fund without any fund injection, is changing education, though in very small pockets. And the best proof of that is parents of students who go to private schools are now coming to Azim Premji or to Adani and saying, please enroll us in your schools, which is a government-owned school. That is good. But it's still very small. The government has to use those techniques for all its schools across India.
Okay. So, yeah, I think that will clearly make a huge difference to the ability to benefit from the demographic dividend for India.
Exactly. A bad output school student is going to be a bad input for colleges, and no amount of good college education 5 years can change the rot that 11 years of bad school education has caused.
Yeah. Coming to the business front, you had mentioned in your book, one of the chapters you had mentioned was about the ability to enforce contracts or get your disputes resolved, and also the judicial system, the way the whole thing works. Now, in some areas, we have definitely seen improvement in the last few years because of the business courts, the tribunals, and matters being moved for expeditious disposal. Do you think enough has been done as an incentive to business in that area? Or,
Yes and no. As ORF last year brought out a monograph where they showed that India has about 6,000 compliances for industrialists, of which about 1,600 are compliances that invite a jail term. Now, the fact is that not many industrialists have gone to jail, which means that they've arrived at settlements outside the system.
Okay.
So those laws have existed only to increase the bribe quota, the bribe quotient, and industrialists have learned to thrive in spite of the government. So there is no contract enforcement. There's very poor contract enforcement. The government has abrogated all the international arbitration cases. And the Devas is the latest one where the government and Devas are fighting. And Devas has won 2 rounds. And now it started freezing attaching government properties overseas. It is unfortunate because today, because of this unwillingness on the part of the government to respect international arbitration awards, very few countries are bringing in money into India's FDI. You're getting FPI. You're getting money as portfolio investments, but not FDI. FDI is declining. And the little FDI that comes in either through Netherlands, which still has a BIT with India, because it has still some time to be to lapse, to have an expiry date, or through Singapore, which also has a BIT. The government tried pressuring both countries to cancel the old BIT, bilateral investment treaty, and to see if they sign a new one, which is not very favorable for arbitration. And both those countries have refused. So an IKEA, which is a Swedish company, comes through Netherlands to make investments in India because they are protected by an international law.
So obviously the FBI, the institutional investing comes, FPI comes with better regulatory provisions because of SEBI.
Obviously, why would you bring in your money in a country where there's a risk? So you bring in money which you can take out overnight, which is what portfolio investors do. But foreign direct investments have declined.
Bhaskar, one question from the audience. What is your experience of the, your transition from being a journalist to being an author of books? How does that work for you?
Well, I'm still a journalist. I'm still a researcher. And I'm still a writer. So I happily, it's not transition. It's just that they coexist. Maybe I was not ready to write a book 10 years ago.
Okay.
And it's just that you have accumulated so much of information one very fine day, either by accident or by design, you say, okay, I'm going to write a book.
Do you have time for one more question, Shubha?
Just a really quick one.
Okay. One last question is a very interesting question. I can ask the question quickly, Bhaskar. Take your time to answer it. Adani seems to have seized opportunities. This is a question from the audience. Seems to have seized opportunities that other industrialists did not. What is his secret sauce?
Well, any industrialist that has to survive in India has to be friendly with politicians. Ambani showed this. Every other industrialist showed this. Adani has been able to bridge has been able to bridge relationships with every political party across the spectrum, not just one political party. He talks to Mamata Banerjee, he talks to the BJP, he talks to Congress, and he gets his work done. He's a good negotiator. He's a good relationship builder.
Thank you, Bhaskar. Thank you, Shubha.
Thank you, Raj. It's good.
Lovely.
Thank you so much. And I think we look forward to a lot more in
Yes, so am I.
Also. And love the perspectives on so many industries, from dairy to solar to the education and the state of education in India. Wonderful perspectives. Thank you, Rajashekar, for anchoring this, and thank you, Mr. Bhaskar, for joining us this evening. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Only one thing I'd like to clarify. Ignore whatever Raj said at the beginning. If I have to start believing him, I won't believe it's me. Okay. Thank you, Raj. It's wonderful talking to you. And thank you for giving me this opportunity. Bangalore Literary Festival. It's good to be with you.
We are honored. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.